the encounter for 50,000 years, the Xanthari had been the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Their empire stretched across 847 star systems, encompassing thousands of worlds and billions of conquered beings. They were giants among the stars, standing 9 feet tall with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect plasma fire and muscles that could crush steel with bare hands. Their ships were living fortresses, grown rather than built, capable of cracking planets in half with their bio-weapons. The Xanthari had a simple philosophy: strength ruled the universe. Every species they encountered either submitted immediately or was crushed within days. Their military records showed an unbroken chain of victories spanning millennia. No alien race had ever caused them to pause, to reconsider, or to adapt their tactics. They were evolution's perfect predators, and the galaxy was their hunting ground. That perfect record was about to meet its first real test. Commander Zektar the Conqueror stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Render, studying the tactical display showing a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. His scouts had discovered this world 3 rotations ago, and the initial reports were almost laughably routine. The inhabitants called themselves humans and were confined to a single planet, still using primitive chemical rockets for space travel. They had barely begun to explore their own solar system, let alone pose any threat to the Xanthari Empire. Another infant species, Zektar muttered to his second-in-command, Sub-Commander Yilkan. This conquest will be over before it begins. Perhaps we should send only a single assault craft to claim this world. Yilkan's mandibles clicked in amusement. The High Council wants a demonstration, Commander. They desire to test our new bioweapons on a living population. These humans will serve as adequate test subjects. Zektar nodded. It was standard procedure. Find a species, overwhelm them with superior force, then either integrate the survivors into the Empire as worker drones or eliminate them entirely if they proved too troublesome. The Xanthari had perfected this process over countless worlds. They expected this small blue planet to follow the same pattern. They were wrong. The first sign that something was different came when the Xanthari fleet entered Earth's solar system. Instead of the usual response, panic, desperate military posturing, or immediate attempts at surrender, the humans did something unprecedented. They tried to communicate. Dr. Marcus Webb, leading xenobiologist at the International Space Consortium, was among the first to detect the massive alien vessels as they passed Jupiter. Rather than alerting only military commanders, he immediately began broadcasting on every frequency humans could manage. Unknown vessels, this is Dr. Marcus Webb of Earth. We welcome you to our solar system. We would like to establish peaceful contact and learn about your civilization. Please respond if you wish to communicate. The message was transmitted in 17 languages, accompanied by mathematical sequences and basic scientific principles. It was humanity's way of saying, we're intelligent, we're curious, and we'd like to be friends. Zektar stared at the communication displays in bewilderment. No species had ever greeted the Xanthari with curiosity instead of terror. The humans weren't mobilizing their pathetic military forces or broadcasting surrender terms. They were asking questions. What are they doing? Yilkan asked, equally confused. I'm not certain, Zektar admitted. Perhaps they don't understand what we are. The Xanthari decided to clarify their intentions with a traditional show of force. They selected a remote human military installation in the Pacific Ocean and demonstrated their bioweapons, turning several square miles of ocean into a bubbling, toxic wasteland. The message was clear: submit or face annihilation. The human response was not what they expected. Instead of surrendering, every major nation on Earth began working together for the first time in human history. Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force found herself coordinating with generals, admirals, and air marshals from every continent. The threat from space had done what decades of diplomacy couldn't. It had united humanity against a common enemy. But more surprising than human unity was human curiosity. Even as military forces prepared for war, scientists like Dr. Webb were analyzing every scrap of data they could gather about the alien vessels. The attack on the Pacific installation had left residue that human researchers immediately began studying. They catalogued the bioweapon's molecular structure, reverse-engineered its energy patterns, and within 72 hours had developed preliminary countermeasures. Their learning, Dr. Webb reported to the Emergency Council, whatever they're used to, poison that water, we can neutralize it, and their ships, they're biological, not mechanical. That gives us options. Commander Chen nodded grimly. What kind of options? The kind that might keep us alive long enough to figure out how to fight. Back when the Zenthari began their formal invasion, they expected terror and chaos. Instead, they found organized resistance unlike anything in their experience. Human forces didn't try to match Zenthari strength with strength. They adapted, improvised, and used their enemy's own biology against them. The first Zenthari shock. Troops to land in major cities found themselves facing not just human weapons, but modified versions of their own bioweapons. Human engineers had somehow reversed the polarity of Zenthari energy fields, turning their own shields into weapons that disrupted their nervous systems. Human medics had developed compounds that interfered with Zenthari healing factors, making even minor wounds potentially fatal. This is impossible, Zektar snarled, as reports flooded in from the surface. No species has ever adapted this quickly to our weapons. It takes years, sometimes decades, for conquered races to understand our technology well enough to use it against us. The humans accomplished it in days, Yulkin reported, his voice tinged with something the Zenthari rarely felt, uncertainty. They're sharing information across their entire planet instantaneously. Every adaptation they make is immediately available to all their forces. But the humans weren't just adapting to Zenthari technology. They were adapting to Zenthari psychology. Commander Chen had studied every interaction between the aliens and human forces, looking for patterns. She realized that the Zenthari relied on intimidation and overwhelming force because they had never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated. They're bullies, she told her staff. They've spent 50,000 years picking on species that couldn't fight back effectively. They don't know how to handle an enemy that studies them, learns from them, and refuses to stay down. Chen's insight led to a new strategy. Instead of trying to win through superior firepower, human forces began using guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and something the Zenthari had never encountered: creativity in combat. Human pilots began ramming their aircraft into Zenthari bioships, but not as simple suicide attacks. They had modified their planes with reverse-engineered Zenthari technology, turning each impact into a system-wide viral attack that spread through the aliens' living vessels like a disease. Human infantry units used improvised weapons that shouldn't have worked against Zenthari armor, but did because they exploited biological weaknesses no one had ever thought to target before. Most shocking of all, humans began capturing Zenthari equipment and soldiers, not to study them for intelligence, but to learn how to improve their own capabilities. Dr. Webb's teams were reverse engineering Xanthari genetic modifications and applying them to willing human volunteers, creating super soldiers who could match Xanthari's strength while retaining human adaptability. The war that should have ended in a week stretched into months. For the first time in their history, the Xanthari found themselves losing ground to an enemy they had initially dismissed as primitive. Zektar's perfect record was developing cracks, and those cracks were spreading throughout the Xanthari military hierarchy. The humans are unprecedented, Zektar finally admitted to the High Council. They learn faster than any species we have encountered. They adapt to every tactic we employ, and they refuse to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. The High Council's response was predictable. Send more ships, employ more devastating weapons, crush the human resistance before it could spread. But Zektar had a growing suspicion that the problem wasn't one of insufficient force. The problem was that the Xanthari had finally met a species that thrived on adversity instead of being broken by it. As the first part of this unprecedented conflict drew to a close, both sides were learning hard lessons. The Xanthari were discovering that strength alone wasn't enough when facing an enemy that could turn any disadvantage into an opportunity. And humanity was learning that they possessed something unique in the galaxy, the ability to face the impossible and find a way to make it possible. The war for Earth was far from over, but already the ripples were spreading across the galaxy. Other conquered species were monitoring human transmissions, learning that the mighty Xanthari could be fought, could be hurt, could be beaten. The humans had accomplished something no other species had managed in 50,000 years. They had made the Xanthari Empire doubt its own invincibility, and doubt, as the galaxy was about to learn, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The revolution 6 months after first contact, the war between humanity and the Xanthari Empire had become something unprecedented in galactic history. What should have been a simple conquest was turning into the Xanthari's first military quagmire in 50 millennia. But the true revolution was just beginning. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the depths of the Cheyenne Mountain facility, surrounded by technology that would have been pure science fiction just a year ago. Human engineers had not only reverse-engineered Xanthari biotechnology, but had begun improving upon it. The fusion of human creativity with alien science was producing results that amazed even the researchers themselves. "Show me the latest prototype," Webb said to his team leader, Dr. Sarah Kim. Dr. Kim activated a holographic display showing a sleek, organic-looking spacecraft. "We call it the Hybrid Fighter. It uses a Xanthari biohull with human neural interface technology. The pilot doesn't just control the ship, they become part of it. Response time is reduced to literally the speed of thought." Webb studied the design with growing excitement. "Have we tested it? 3 successful flights. The pilots report it's like nothing they've ever experienced. The ship anticipates their needs, responds to their emotions, and amplifies their natural reflexes beyond anything we thought possible." This was exactly what Commander Sarah Chen had been hoping for. The unified Earth Defense Force had been holding its own against Xanthari forces, but they needed something more than just survival. They needed to win decisively enough to send a message across the galaxy. Chance opportunity came when intelligence reports identified a massive Xanthari command vessel entering the outer solar system. The ship, designated as a hive mind coordinator, was responsible for managing Xanthari operations across dozens of star systems. It was heavily defended, considered impregnable, and carried some of the most advanced technology in the Xanthari arsenal. "We're going to capture it," Chen announced. To her senior staff, the room fell silent. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, her tactical advisor, was the first to speak. Commander, that ship is larger than any vessel humanity has ever built. It's defended by an entire battle group. Even with our hybrid technology, this would be a suicide mission. Chen smiled with the confidence of someone who had learned to think like a human fighting an alien war. Not if we don't fight like they expect us to. The plan Chen developed was audacious beyond belief. Instead of a direct assault, human forces would use their greatest advantage, the Zen-3's own predictable psychology. After months of conflict, patterns had emerged in alien behavior. The Zen-3 always responded to direct threats with overwhelming force, but they had never learned to recognize deception and misdirection as legitimate military tactics. Human forces staged a fake surrender. Dr. Webb's team had developed a way to mimic Zen-3 biotechnology signatures, creating false broadcasts that appeared to come from human leaders admitting defeat. The message was carefully crafted to appeal to Zen-3 pride. Humanity acknowledged their superiority and begged for mercy. Commander Zektar, who had been growing increasingly frustrated with the prolonged conflict, saw the surrender as an opportunity to salvage his reputation. He ordered the hive mind coordinator to approach Earth directly, intending to accept humanity's submission in person and demonstrate Zen-3 magnanimity to the galaxy. What he didn't realize was that the surrendering human delegates approaching his ship were actually the most advanced hybrid fighters ever created, disguised using stolen Zen-3 cloaking technology. Each ship carried a volunteer pilot who had undergone genetic modification using captured Zen-3 DNA, allowing them to interface directly with alien biosystems. The operation's success hinged on a breakthrough discovery by Dr. Webb's team. They had learned that Zen-3 bioships were controlled by a central nervous system that could be hijacked if accessed directly. It was like a computer virus, but for living technology. Captain Maria Santos, the lead pilot on the mission, had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the plan. Her hybrid fighter would physically attach to the hive mind coordinator's hull and inject her directly into the ship's bioneural network. If successful, she could take control of the entire vessel. If it failed, she would be absorbed into the ship's biological systems and die. Remember, Chun's voice crackled through the comm system as Santos approached the massive alien vessel. You're not just fighting for Earth. Every species the Zen-3 have conquered is watching. Show them what humans can do. Santos' fighter attached to the hive mind coordinator's hull without triggering alarms. The bioship's automated systems recognized the hybrid craft as friendly due to its Zen-3 biological components. Santos activated the neural interface and felt her consciousness merge with the alien vessel's living computers. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She could feel the ship's vital systems, its weapons, its navigation, its communication arrays. But she could also sense something else, the ship's connection to the entire Zen-3 communication network. Through this single vessel, she could access military communications across hundreds of star systems. I'm in, Santos reported. And you're not going to believe what I'm seeing. What Santos discovered changed everything. The Zen-3 Empire wasn't as strong as it appeared. Their conquest of hundreds of worlds had left them overextended, with most of their military spread thin across vast distances. More importantly, many of the species they had conquered were not as submissive as the Zen-3 believed. Resistance movements existed on dozens of worlds, but they had never coordinated their efforts because they assumed they were alone. Santos downloaded everything she could access, and then did something that would echo across the galaxy. Using the HiveMind Coordinator's communication array, she broadcast a message to every Zenthora-controlled system. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the Human Defense Force. We have captured a Zenthari command vessel and accessed their communication network. To all conquered species receiving this transmission, you are not alone. The Zenthari can be beaten. We have the proof, and we're sharing it with you now." The data package Santos transmitted contained detailed information about Zenthari military deployments, their technological weaknesses, and most importantly, detailed instructions for the hybrid weapons and tactics humans had developed. It was a complete resistance manual, delivered simultaneously to every oppressed world in the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. On the industrial world of Kepler 442b, the enslaved Vorthok used the human data to sabotage Zenthari mining operations. On the ocean planet Gli 667c, the aquatic Haidari turned their forced labor facilities into weapons manufacturing centers. On dozens of worlds, species that had been subjugated for millennia suddenly found themselves with both the knowledge and the inspiration to fight back. Commander Zektar watched in horror as his communication systems lit up with reports of simultaneous uprisings across the Empire. Worlds that had been peaceful for thousands of years were suddenly in open revolt. Zenthari garrison forces were being overwhelmed by coordinated attacks using modified versions of their own weapons. "How is this possible?" Zektar demanded. His communication officer's response was barely audible. "The humans, Commander. They've taught the entire galaxy how to fight us." The Zenthari High Council convened an emergency session as reports continued to flood in. Their empire, built over 50,000 years of conquest, was fragmenting in real time. Species they had dismissed as permanently broken were rising up with human-designed weapons and human tactical knowledge. But the revolution wasn't just military. The humans had shared something even more dangerous than weapons. They had shared the idea that the Zenthari could be defeated. For the first time in galactic history, the conquered species had hope. Ambassador Lyra of the Matherian Republic had been in exile for 3 decades. Her people scattered after the Zenthari conquered their homeworld. When she received Santos' transmission, she immediately began coordinating with other displaced leaders. Within days, they had formed the Galactic Liberation Alliance, with Earth as its unofficial headquarters. Dr. Webb found himself working not just with human scientists, but with researchers from dozens of species, each contributing their unique knowledge to the growing arsenal of anti-Zenthari weapons. The Vorthok shared their expertise in metallurgy. The Haidari contributed advanced biotechnology, and the crystalline Nexari provided insights into energy manipulation that revolutionized human power systems. The war that had begun as a simple conquest attempt had become a galaxy-wide revolution. The Zenthari Empire, which had never faced coordinated resistance, suddenly found itself fighting on hundreds of fronts simultaneously. Their military, designed for overwhelming individual opponents, was completely unprepared for a coordinated galaxy-wide uprising. Commander Chen received a communication from the Zenthari High Council requesting negotiations for the first time. In their history, the Zenthari were asking to talk instead of simply imposing their will through force. "They want to negotiate?" Chen asked, hardly believing the reports. "It appears so," Dr. Webb confirmed. "Their empire is collapsing. They're facing revolts on over 300 worlds, and they don't have the forces to suppress them all. They need to end this conflict before they lose everything." The negotiations that followed established the Galactic Confederation, a democratic alliance of free species with Earth as one of its founding members. The Zenthari Empire was broken up into smaller, democratically governed systems, with former conquered species taking control of their own destinies. Zector, meeting Commander Chen for the first time in person, was struck by how small humans were compared to his people. Yet this tiny species had accomplished what no other race in the galaxy had managed. They had brought down the Zenthari Empire not through superior strength, but through superior adaptability and the courage to share their knowledge freely. You could have kept your weapons to yourselves, Zector observed. You could have used your advantage to build your own empire. Chen shook her head. That's not who we are. We believe the galaxy is big enough for everyone to be free. Years later, historians would mark the human resistance as the turning point in galactic civilization. Humanity became known as the catalyst species, not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they had the courage to stand up to tyranny and the wisdom to share the tools of freedom with others. The strongest species in the galaxy had met humanity, and history had indeed taken a turn. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And it all started with a small blue planet whose people refused to surrender their curiosity, their creativity, and their belief that everyone deserved to be free.